Intro. When people think of the Rolling Stones, names like Mick Jagger and Keith Richards immediately come to mind. But before they became legends, there was one man who laid the foundation, shaped the band's sound, style, and even attitude: Brian Jones. A musical genius with the ability to play dozens of instruments, yet a deeply conflicted and self-destructive figure. From an ambitious young musician leading the band to a man cast aside by the very group he founded, Brian Jones's life is a story of both great brilliance and heartbreaking tragedy. So, what led such a talented star to spiral into darkness? Let's take a deep dive into the life of the man behind the early years of the Rolling Stones. Childhood. Louis Brian Hopkins Jones was born on February 28, 1942, in Cheltenham, Gloucestershire, England, as the first child of Louis Blunt Jones and Louisa Beatrice Jones, née Simmons. His father was an aeronautical engineer with a deep passion for music, while his mother was a pianist and organist who led the local church choir. Growing up in a musically rich household, Brian was immersed in music from an early age. His parents' influence played a significant role in shaping his love for music, although he would later diverge from their more classical preferences in favor of blues and jazz. Brian had two younger sisters, but his family endured a heartbreaking tragedy early on. His sister Pamela, born in 1943, died of leukemia in 1945 at the age of 2. This loss had a profound impact on the family, particularly on Brian's emotional development. In 1946, his second sister, Barbara, was born, and she became the only sibling he grew up with. Despite the warmth of his family, Brian struggled with health issues from a young age. At 4, he suffered a severe attack of croup, which left him with chronic asthma, a condition that would persist throughout his life and later be aggravated by his lifestyle choices. Although Brian's early exposure to music was through his parents' classical background, he quickly developed a fascination with jazz and blues. By the time he was 15, he had become an avid fan of jazz saxophonist Cannonball Adderley, which led him to persuade his parents to buy him a saxophone. Recognizing his deep passion, they later gifted him an acoustic guitar for his 17th birthday. These instruments became his escape, his way of expressing himself, and the foundation for what would become an extraordinary musical career. Brian was academically gifted and had a natural aptitude for learning, excelling in subjects like physics and chemistry with minimal effort. However, he detested the rigid discipline of school life. He attended Dean Close School and later Cheltenham Grammar School for Boys, where his rebellious nature often put him at odds with authority figures. Though he passed A-levels in physics and chemistry, he failed in biology, and by this time, his passion for music had completely overshadowed any academic ambitions. He was suspended twice due to conflicts with school authorities, cementing his reputation as someone who resisted conformity. During his teenage years, Brian's personal life became increasingly complicated, and he made several choices that would have lasting consequences. By the age of 16, he had fathered his first child, who was given up for adoption. In 1959, his girlfriend Valerie Corbett became pregnant, and despite Brian urging her to have an abortion, she chose to give birth to their son, Barry David, in 1960. Like his first child, Barry was placed for adoption. That same year, a brief affair with a married woman resulted in another child, Belinda, born in August 1960, whom Brian never knew about. In 1961, his girlfriend Pat Andrews gave birth to Julian Mark Andrews, the only child Brian had some involvement with early on. However, his commitment to fatherhood was fleeting, as he continued to prioritize his music and personal freedom over family responsibilities. Brian's relationship with his parents was complex. While they supported his musical abilities, they were deeply concerned about his reckless lifestyle and lack of direction. His father, in particular, had high expectations for him, which Brian continuously defied. The tension between them was evident, and years later, after Brian's tragic death, his father expressed regret, admitting in a letter that he had been a very poor and intolerant father and that he wished he had been more understanding. This emotional strain within the family likely fueled Brian's need for external validation and his tendency to seek solace in music rather than personal relationships. Brian Jones's musical career was both groundbreaking and tumultuous, marking him as one of the most innovative yet tragic figures in rock history. As the founding member and original leader of the Rolling Stones, he played a crucial role in shaping the band's sound, identity, and early success. His multi-instrumental talents, deep appreciation for rhythm and blues, and pioneering spirit helped create a new wave of British rock that would influence generations to come. However, his journey from a respected bandleader to a sidelined figure within his own group was marked by personal struggles, conflicts, and ultimately, a tragic downfall. Born into a musically inclined family, Brian was introduced to various genres at an early age. He was particularly drawn to American blues and jazz, an interest that set him apart from many of his peers in the UK, where pop and skiffle music dominated the scene. By the early 1960s, he had fully immersed himself in London's burgeoning rhythm and blues movement, frequenting jazz clubs and playing in small bands. His earliest known musical endeavor was a group called the Roosters, which also included future Cream guitarist Eric Clapton after Jones left. In May 1962, Brian placed an advertisement in Jazz News, seeking musicians for a new R&B band. Pianist Ian Stewart was the first to respond, followed by Mick Jagger and Keith Richards. The three quickly bonded over their shared love for blues music, particularly artists like Muddy Waters, Elmore James, and Howlin' Wolf. The band was soon completed with the addition of bassist Bill Wyman and drummer Charlie Watts, forming what would become the Rolling Stones. Jones reportedly named the band during a phone call with a venue owner, taking inspiration from Muddy Waters' song Rollin' Stone Blues. The Rolling Stones played their first official gig on July 12, 1962, at the Marquee Club in London. At this stage, Jones was undeniably the leader of the band. He was the most musically experienced member and had the strongest knowledge of blues, making him responsible for selecting material, arranging songs, and guiding the band's musical direction. His distinctive slide guitar playing and harmonica skills were essential to their early sound, bringing a raw and authentic blues. His multi-instrumental talents, deep appreciation for rhythm and blues, and pioneering spirit helped create a new wave of British rock that would influence generations to come. However, his journey from a respected bandleader to a sidelined figure within his own group was marked by personal struggles, conflicts, and ultimately, a tragic downfall. Born into a musically inclined family, Brian was introduced to various genres at an early age. He was particularly drawn to American blues and jazz, an interest that set him apart from many of his peers in the UK, where pop and skiffle music dominated the scene. By the early 1960s, he had fully immersed himself in London's burgeoning rhythm and blues movement, frequenting jazz clubs and playing in small bands. His earliest known musical endeavor was a group called the Roosters, which also included future Cream guitarist Eric Clapton after Jones left. In May 1962, Brian placed an advertisement in Jazz News, seeking musicians for a new R&B band. Pianist Ian Stewart was the first to respond, followed by Mick Jagger and Keith Richards. The three quickly bonded over their shared love for blues music, particularly artists like Muddy Waters, Elmore James, and Howlin' Wolf. The band was soon completed with the addition of bassist Bill Wyman and drummer Charlie Watts, forming what would become the Rolling Stones. Jones reportedly named the band during a phone call with a venue owner, taking inspiration from Muddy Waters' song Rollin' Stone Blues. The Rolling Stones played their first official gig on July 12, 1962, at the Marquee Club in London. At this stage, Jones was undeniably the leader of the band. He was the most musically experienced member and had the strongest knowledge of blues, making him responsible for selecting material, arranging songs, and guiding the band's musical direction. His distinctive slide guitar playing and harmonica skills were essential to their early sound, bringing a raw and authentic blues feel to their music. Brian's contribution to the Rolling Stones extended far beyond his instrumental skills. He played a key role in their image and marketing, ensuring that they stood apart from their contemporaries, such as the Beatles. While the Beatles cultivated a clean-cut, approachable persona, Brian helped craft the Rolling Stones' rebellious, anti-establishment identity, which resonated with younger audiences and contributed to their rising fame. His sharp fashion sense, striking blonde hair, and photogenic looks made him one of the most recognizable faces of the band. His confidence in his leadership even led him to negotiate a higher salary than the other members in 1963, paying himself £5 more per week, a decision that caused friction within the group. As the band gained popularity, Brian's role began to shift. While he had been the driving force in their early years, by the mid-1960s, Mick Jagger and Keith Richards had become the dominant creative forces of the band, particularly as songwriters. With the release of their original compositions, Brian's influence started to wane. He contributed to several early Rolling Stones songs under the pseudonym Nanker Felge, but he never had a song credited solely to him. Despite his declining leadership, Brian remained a musical visionary and a highly skilled multi-instrumentalist. His talent went far beyond the guitar. He played the sitar, dulcimer, marimba, organ, saxophone, recorder, and numerous other instruments, often incorporating exotic sounds into the band's music. He was particularly instrumental in their Satanic Majesty's Request, 1967, where his Moroccan influences and experimental use of instruments shaped the psychedelic feel of the album. Brian's interest in world music went beyond the Rolling Stones. In 1967, he composed the soundtrack for the film A Degree of Murder, starring his then-girlfriend Anita Pallenberg. Unlike his work with the Stones, this project allowed him to explore music freely. He played a wide range of instruments, including the sitar, organ, autoharp, and harmonica, proving his versatility as a musician. In 1968, he traveled to Morocco to record traditional musicians at the Pipes of Pan festival in Jujuka. Some of these recordings were released posthumously in 1971 as Brian Jones presents The Pipes of Pan at Jujuka, one of the earliest introductions of North African music to Western audiences. By the late 1960s, Brian's personal struggles, especially his substance abuse and erratic behavior, began to seriously impact his role in the Rolling Stones. His heavy drug and alcohol use led to missed recording sessions and poor performances, frustrating his bandmates. He also suffered a hand injury in 1966, which affected his guitar playing. Adding to his troubles, he was arrested multiple times for drug possession, and while he avoided jail time, his criminal record made it difficult for him to travel to the U.S., complicating the band's touring schedule. As his reliability dwindled, tensions within the band grew. By 1968 and early 1969, he was barely contributing to recordings, with session musicians often filling in for him. On June 8, 1969, Brian officially left the Rolling Stones. The band's official statement claimed that he was departing due to musical differences, but many believe that he was actually fired. Scandal's Brian Jones, the founding member and original leader of the Rolling Stones, was as renowned for his musical genius as he was for his tumultuous personal life. His penchant for womanizing, substance abuse, and erratic behavior significantly contributed to the band's bad boy image, but these same traits also led to his personal and professional decline. Jones's relationships were often marred by volatility and abuse. He was known to be emotionally and physically abusive towards his girlfriends, with reports suggesting he exhibited sexually sadistic behavior. His tumultuous relationship with Anita Pallenberg, who later became involved with bandmate Keith Richards, is a notable example of his troubled personal life. His substance abuse was extensive and varied, including alcohol, cocaine, heroin, LSD, and other hallucinogens. This heavy drug use led to erratic behavior, missed performances, and strained relationships within the band. Even Keith Richards, himself known for drug use, expressed concern over Jones's excessive consumption. Jones's legal troubles further compounded his difficulties. He was first arrested on May 10, 1967, after a police raid on his London flat uncovered significant amounts of marijuana, cocaine, and methamphetamine. He pleaded guilty to marijuana possession, resulting in a £1,000 fine, 3 years probation, and an order to seek professional help. A second arrest occurred on May 21, 1968, for cannabis possession. Given he was on probation, Jones faced a potential prison sentence. Although found guilty, the judge showed leniency, imposing a £50 fine and £105 in costs, along with a warning to avoid future trouble. These legal issues severely impacted Jones's ability to tour, particularly in the United States, due to difficulties obtaining visas. His health deteriorated from excessive drug and alcohol use, leading to missed performances and recording sessions. His erratic behavior and declining contributions strained his relationships with bandmates, culminating in his departure from the Rolling Stones in June 1969. Marriage and other relationships. Brian Jones had a deeply complex and often tumultuous personal life, marked by numerous romantic relationships, friendships, and conflicts that played a significant role in shaping both his career and personal downfall. His charismatic yet self-destructive nature drew many people toward him, but his volatile behavior, substance abuse, and emotional instability often led to fractured relationships and isolation. Brian's most notorious and destructive romantic relationship was with Anita Pallenberg, a German-Italian model and actress whom he met in 1965. Their relationship was passionate but chaotic, fueled by heavy drug use, emotional volatility, and instances of physical abuse. Jones, despite his talent and charisma, was deeply insecure, and his controlling nature often led to outbursts of jealousy and violence toward Anita. The breaking point came in 1967, during a trip to Morocco with Keith Richards, where Jones, increasingly paranoid and unstable, allegedly became physically abusive toward Pallenberg. This led Anita to leave him for Keith Richards, a betrayal that deeply wounded Brian both emotionally and professionally. The loss of Anita was more than just a breakup, it symbolized Jones's declining position within the Rolling Stones. His drug addiction and erratic behavior had already begun to alienate him from the band, but losing Anita to his bandmate, Keith Richards, solidified his sense of exclusion. Following their split, Anita and Keith became one of rock and roll's most famous couples, while Brian spiraled deeper into isolation, addiction, and depression. Before Anita, Brian had a relationship with Linda Lawrence, a British woman who gave birth to his son, Julian Brian Lawrence, in 1964. However, Brian had little involvement in Julian's life. Linda later went on to marry Donovan, the famous Scottish singer-songwriter, who adopted and raised Julian as his own. This further distanced Brian from his son, adding to the growing number of strained and abandoned relationships in his life. Brian's romantic entanglements extended beyond Anita and Linda. He had numerous affairs and casual relationships with models, actresses, and socialites, living up to his reputation as a womanizer. Among them was Suki Poitier, an English model who became one of Brian's close companions in his final years. Some sources suggest that Suki tried to help Brian recover from his drug problems, but his self-destructive tendencies made it impossible for her to truly intervene. Another significant figure in Brian's later life was Anna Wolin, a Swedish actress who was living with him at Cochford Farm at the time of his death in July 1969. Anna has since spoken out about her belief that Brian was murdered, adding fuel to the many conspiracy theories surrounding his untimely passing. She claimed that Brian was in better health than people assumed and that he was ready to turn his life around, which contradicts the official narrative of his death being caused by misadventure due to drug and alcohol use. Beyond his romantic relationships, Brian's friendships were equally complicated. His early bond with Mick Jagger and Keith Richards, which had been the foundation of the Rolling Stones, deteriorated over time due to power struggles, jealousy, and Brian's increasingly erratic behavior. In the beginning, Brian was the band's undisputed leader, but as Mick and Keith became the primary songwriters, his influence dwindled, and he became resentful and withdrawn. Brian also had conflicted relationships with other members of the band, including Charlie Watts and Bill Wyman. While Charlie was more reserved and avoided confrontation, Bill Wyman later admitted that he saw Brian as both an incredibly talented musician and a deeply troubled individual who was incapable of handling success. As his drug use worsened and his reliability declined, the band gradually pushed him out. By 1968, Brian was barely contributing to the Rolling Stones recordings, and by June 1969, he was forced to leave the band he had founded. Although the official reason given was that he and the rest of the band had musical differences, it was clear that his self-destructive habits and inability to function within the group led to his dismissal. The loss of Anita, the breakdown of his friendships, and his expulsion from the Rolling Stones all contributed to Brian's rapid decline in his final months. He became increasingly reclusive, surrounding himself with a small circle of friends, new acquaintances, and people he barely knew. Many of these individuals were drawn to him not out of genuine care but because of his fame, wealth, and access to drugs. His isolation was further intensified by his legal troubles, which made it difficult for him to tour internationally and limited his career options. Brian faced significant challenges in the late 1960s due to his health and struggles with addiction, which severely impacted his musical contributions. A hand injury in 1966 further hindered his guitar playing abilities. As the band prepared for a U.S. tour in 1969, Jones was unable to participate due to legal issues stemming from his drug-related arrests. In June 1969, he officially parted ways with the band. While it was publicly announced that he departed for musical reasons, rumors suggested he was actually dismissed. Tragically, just a few weeks after leaving the Rolling Stones, on July 3, 1969, Brian Jones was found dead in his swimming pool at his home in Cochford Farm, East Sussex. He was only 27 years old, making him one of the earliest members of the so-called 27 Club of musicians who died at that age. The coroner's report stated that Jones died by drowning, later clarified as death by misadventure, and noted that his liver and heart were greatly enlarged due to past drug and alcohol abuse. His untimely death shocked the world and remains one of rock music's greatest tragedies. Despite his troubled life and career, Brian Jones's contributions to the Rolling Stones and his influence on music cannot be denied.